since the subject is European identity, I think first of all it's worth to mention that we are, as individuals, the people as individuals, we're putting very different meaning into this notion of European identity. Each and every one of us, we are putting in there very different, very personal, very individual, so to say, meaning. We understand it differently, what it means, really, European identity. I think that's, first of all, there is no kind of unified definition what it really means, because there is variety of opinions, so to say, what it means, European identity. At the same time, somehow, miraculously, we got this subconscious or whatever understanding notion that such thing exists. It's not material, but it exists. It's there. We somehow affiliate ourselves with this meaning, at least Europeans, that yes, there is common European identity. We, as Europeans, we have things in common. Could be social, could be political, historical, cultural. Many people associate, thank you, themselves with as some significant part of the European identity that the European Union now, this political structure, it plays a role as a kind of sign for European identity. United Europe, social well-being, Europe being economically strong, being a good example for the rest of the world, and so on and so on. One can name many, many examples. To some extent, this notion, and it's again individual, it is confronted with the national identity. In some cases stronger, in some cases weaker, but one can trace it. Yeah, there are cases when this European identity, or particularly when we refer to some political structure like European Union, that there are cases when it is confronted with national identity. And I can touch upon really later upon those cases in particular situations. Well, there are particularly, I think, two driving forces closely linked. It's a visionary thing, at least, or visionary politicians, ideas, visions, and economic interests. And both things are very, very important. There's also cultural heritage, cultural history, experience, and this is also a very important thing. But I think this political driving force and economic or business driving force, those two things are very, very important. I think the European Union as a structure, as a result, as political union, is very much based upon economic interests and political vision. At least that was the beginning in my understanding. I'm here expressing only naturally only my individual views, and they are not affiliated or they are not, so to say, official kind of views of my country or my government. So my personal opinion is that, yeah, indeed, I mean, the beginning of the European Union after the Second World War, that was, first of all, the experience in Europe of the really tragic results of the Second World War, and the general wish and feeling in the society that those horrible things should not be repeated, and the question mark how we move forward and how we avoid those mistakes in the future. Out of that, and strongly supported by economic interests, basically emerged the European Union. How, in a way, how we know it, how we today recognize it. That's my understanding. One can assume although at the same time there will be many who will deny it. One can assume that basically it is kind of project stemming or coming from political elite or political and business elite. And sometimes it may happen to be a little bit distanced or distracted or a little bit separated from kind of general feeling or general, so to say, tendencies in the society, within the society, in all countries of the European Union. Yeah, that might be so, but I think to promote some idea, one has to have some driving force which is driving the whole process, which is organizing, which is financing the whole process. And definitely when there is a business interest for greater market, for more political unity, and more political role that European Union or Europe is playing in the world, then this idea is very much being supported from the business and political circles. And eventually, in the end, all the society benefits from that. I'm a little bit afraid that I sound too technocratic, but that's how one can explain in very simple terms how I see the whole structure and the being and functioning of the European Union. I have served in Brussels, and of course, yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive how the whole machinery is working and living its everyday life. Sometimes I got the feeling that it is a little bit distanced from the real day life on the street and from real destinies, real ideas, from the real people from city of Brussels or country Belgium or some other countries. But that's I take it as a kind of political machinery and the head, so to say, of political union, and that's how things are. I would say that today, due to economic crisis, we are experiencing sort of a test drive for European Union, to some extent also for this European identity idea or notion. One can say also it's extreme test drive. Governments are first looking, and that's where it becomes confronted with so to say national identity, because it's a European Union, the highest political structure what we have in Europe. It's a union of countries, of states. It's not a nation state, and that's huge difference. Therefore, what happens in times of crisis, of course, despite the fact that we have all the governmental bodies in Brussels, but the nation states are strong enough still. And if something bad happens, of course, the governments, national governments, first of all, they are looking after their own interest, or they are looking, so to say, they are responding to the request from their own societies and their own countries, and that's only normal. I mean, it's very traditional. It has been there all the time. And the question is how it then fits together in a wider European context. And just one example, which was very surprising, actually, but it also shows how difficult the process is. The crisis, the economic crisis in Greece, when we were looking how it was reflected in the media, I was very much surprised when this in this discussion came up, the issue, and it was raised by politicians actually in Greece, about the compensation of what was done, the wrongdoings of German army in Greece during the Second World War. So and then some responses in the German media. I don't know, suggesting selling some islands and so on, and thus getting out of the economic crisis for Greece. So that only shows, I mean, how fragile, or one can scratch the surface and suddenly the kind of old things come up on the surface. And how fragile really it is. And it doesn't happen automatically. I mean, all the good things. I mean, we cannot take it for granted. I mean, it's not that simple. I mean, all this heavy baggage called history, it's still there. I mean, it can come up to the surface in kind of extreme conditions or in special situations. And that was one big surprise, because on the surface, basically on governmental level, on political level, initially everyone says, okay, we stick together, those are difficult times, we will go through those difficult times, we stick together, we have the Union, we have the Eurozone, and so on and so on. So we have common identity, so we go forward, and nothing can sway us away from our course, so to say. Apparently, it's not that simple. When the real crisis comes forward, it's not that simple. And this particular situation shows how this European identity is immediately, or could be immediately, confronted with national identity and with historical experience and heritage. And governments first looking after themselves and then after partners in the Union. And that's also, we have to take it, that is also, to some extent, to some degree, it's normal. Because the European Union is not a nation state. And historically, culturally, yeah, we are different. We have many things in common. At the same time, we have also differences that one has to recognize also that fact. It takes time. Simply, it takes time. This process for United States took 200 years, something, for United States to become a country like it is today. So why should we expect that for Europe it will take less to become more unified and with a stronger sense of common European identity? So I would say that on the surface, we have this sense, or majority of us, we have this sense of European identity, but it can be contested in particular conditions. And I think nowadays, or today, we are experiencing those particular conditions. If everything develops as it should, which must not be taken for granted as well, but if everything develops in more or less normal progressive way, then in the future, of course, we most likely will have in Europe very, very solid common identity, but now it's in the making, now it's in the process. What is not helpful, I think, personally, I think what is not helpful, and Mr. Kiev mentioned that, is that, the times are changing, and that's unavoidable. Generations are changing, and that's unavoidable. But the way society is developing, the way political culture is developing, not only in Europe, but I think the same can be referred to United States and many other places in the world. The world is moving kind of faster and faster, spinning virtually. And what it means in real life, it means that we are experiencing, and in Europe on national level, but also on the EU level, we are experiencing, in my opinion, more and more technocratic governments. More and more technocratic governments. The governments, the politicians, which are technocrats and thinking in that way. Maybe partially it's not bad, but there are some negative consequences as well. Because how one can describe it? I mean, one needs quick fixes for everything. I mean, there is no time to wait. We need quick fixes, and politicians are making those quick fixes. I mean, no one making quick solutions. I mean, seeking quick solutions. No one is looking beyond, or no administration is looking beyond its own legislative period. I mean, 4 years normally. I mean, and then it's someone else's problem. I mean, that's very often, I mean, is kind of attitude, and everyone is looking for quick fixes, and therefore this is a kind of danger, because we start lacking, I mean, kind of proper discussions about future of Europe, about identity, about cultural identity, about the grand scale, the big scale ideas. We are lacking really great politicians in Europe, I would say, statesmen. No, instead of that, we see more and more technocrats. Maybe they are good for, or far better than great statesmen. They are far better for quick fixes, what society demands. And they can fix it quickly. That doesn't mean necessarily that doesn't create problems in a longer perspective, but that's what is happening. No one has time to wait. One is so to say, screaming, the society is screaming for quick fixes. We need to fix this, we need to fix that, pensions, we need to fix medical care, we need to fix the budget, we need to fix this and that, and we cannot wait. No one can wait. So basically, that creates this kind of technocratic government, which is very, very much ready or forced to be ready to make those quick fixes. And this is a big, I think, challenge for a kind of greater good or long-term perspective in Europe, creating long-term, so to say, a stronger identity, stronger European Union with some purpose and ideas where we are going, why we are doing this or that, and what's the meaning of the whole thing. So, and you can really observe political campaigns in European countries and what kind of slogans the parties are using. And there is very much also, I think, this voice against the European Union on some political aspects. I mean, this voice is getting stronger, and with no counterbalance explaining what it is all about, why we need European Union, what does it mean, European identity. I think there is some factor of risking sliding back in kind of national identity, strongly confronted with a European identity in the future. I think the risk is there, unless there are some corrections or some additional effort is made there. So it's not that simple or cloudless, so to say, future or perception that yes, everything is fine. I mean, we have everything. I mean, European identity is there. Everything is there, put in place. So we don't have much to care about it. It's there. It's taken for granted. It's not at all. It's not at all like that. And there are many risks and challenges ahead of us. So that's kind of view about the European identity and identification with Europe. From my side, I hope it's not too much technocratic, since, I feel myself also, I mean, part of of course, state system machinery and so on, but doesn't mean that we don't think. We think quite often. I mean, what's the meaning, greater meaning for the European Union policies, and it very often not, let's say very often there are situations that it's very difficult for some particular things to find so to say justification or how it fits into some greater scheme, because national interests are involved also, and that confuses the whole picture. But on national level speaking, how it was with Latvia, a small country, of course, for us after regaining the independence in 1991, I mean, we joining the European Union and NATO, it was the those were two main foreign policy goals to be achieved. And how we justified that, I mean, in internal political debate, we said, yeah, that's part of the European identity. That's what we are going after. I mean, that's our return in Europe, despite the fact that NATO is transatlantic being, but nevertheless, it was perceived in Latvia that, yeah, that's also those political structures, they are part of our identity, of our European identity. And I can very much subscribe to what Mr. Kiev said, that I feel also a modern, so to say, Latvian patriot and at the same time a European. And inside of me, I mean, those two notions, they are not confronted against each other. So that comes organically, so to say, or naturally. And there is no, in my mind, there is no kind of confrontational element in that. So that was how it was perceived on national level. Of course, yeah, I mean, one cannot describe the European identity only with political structures. You can ask then some Norwegian, if Norway is not in the European Union, do they feel less European for that, or Swiss? No, I think not. I mean, they are also part of Europe and with their own history and heritage and culture, and this is a part of Europe, despite the fact that they are not in NATO or European Union. So it's, as I said, it's very different way how we perceive, how we see European identity. It cannot be touched in a way, kind of physical way, but one can say that, yeah, it's there, and then we put each and every one of us, we put kind of a little bit separate or a little bit different meaning into that notion. And it will be tested, and it is tested in the longer run. And it has a great perspective into developing into something very solid in the longer perspective. There have been attempts throughout the history to unite bigger or smaller parts of Europe, and that was done in different ways by kings and countries and empires. But nothing lasts forever, of course. So we will see how this great project, which is called European Union, how it develops, and hopefully it doesn't lose, so to say, the deeper, so to say, meaning and idea about the development, which direction we are going, and why, and what we are making in the longer perspective. What are our goals to be achieved? So everyone has to have a certain goal and certain, so to say, meaning. So that's kind of quite a lengthy explanation from my side how I understand this term European identity. Thank you. But if you have questions, I would be at least trying to answer them.
Thank you very much. Once again, we have another European amongst us.
Yeah.
Latvian.
Surprise, surprise.
Thank you very much for your reflections. I see many hands, and
okay.
Maybe at this point, let's start on this side, and then we'll go to that side just for a change. And then I'll start on here, and then we'll move our way to the middle.
Thank you. You said that the European identity is quite abstract. And what do you think has to be done to make it more, to make it more to something that people can relate to, that
right.
Even people who, like you worked, for example, in Brussels, so it's, you feel European in a way.
Sure.
But how do we make people that don't have this relation to Brussels, for example, also feel the European identity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think certain things can be done in education in schools. Certain things can be done with cultural exchanges among countries, and I don't know how, but I believe partially it's already happening because European Union also is devoting some money for all sorts of cultural projects and heritage and so on and so on. education and exchange in terms of culture, but also I would say, exchange of people in kind of facilitating the tourism activities and just people traveling, visiting other countries, and so to say, experiencing all what's in those countries. So and thus bringing it closer and somehow creating this feeling that it all belongs to Europe. Europe can exist in different kinds of ways, but it's still Europe. So, but there are definitely things which can be done, I think, with education and some facilitation in cultural exchange, first of all. But as I said, very much also depends from political climate and kind of, what kind of politicians we are having on national level also, but also in Brussels. It's not a simple answer. I would say also it matters. I mean, the time matters. I mean, it just requires some time. It's a relatively new project. I mean, after the Second World War, okay, I mean, beginning of 50s and 60s, I mean, it's not such a long time. I mean, 50 years or 60 years in the history of mankind, it's nothing, basically. So one cannot expect that we will have something solid already or something very, very, I mean, the very, very big achievements. Undeniably, those achievements, they exist. I mean, at least economically. I mean, when you look at the European Union performance or Eurozone performance, it's quite a lot. I mean, what has been achieved when we look back into history, how it was back there. So that's it's not an easy question to answer, but at least a couple of things can be done better, definitely. Yeah, thank you. And also, I think by education, I mean student exchanges, by the way, also among the universities. That's also very important thing to be done.
Hello, thank you very much for your more realistic point of view, at least in the first part of the speech. I'm very glad that you had this wake-up call to express that in times of crisis, it is harder to speak about an European identity, and that we need to think about that.
It's tested or contested, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty easy to speak about an European identity when there is progress, when there is peace.
Sure.
And we were all over this week speaking about our common history, common identity, common values. Mm-hmm. And I personally am very afraid because I think we take this for granted, and we're not expecting a war maybe, but in the world that we have today with unexpected things, for example, maybe a viruses or maybe a very big economic crisis, how can we deal with that in the future? It's more of a comment than a question, but thank you for your more realistic perspective.
Thank you. No, I think I think the existence, when we speak about European Union as a part of European identity, then the very existence of the European Union is beneficial in that way that to deal with such kinds of crises, all kinds of crises actually, it's better to have one or to have this union than not to have one, because I think on individual basis it's much harder for some countries to deal with different sorts of crises. And I think the one thing which is pressing us or compressing us together, or countries in Europe, is this global economic development, or the way the economy is going ahead. The question is whether we like it or not, or whether we are happy with everything what comes with in that package, comes with this kind of pressure in that package. How it affects us, because it affects us, every member of society, because it changes our our everyday life, basically. And it's driven more and more by global economy. That means that our jobs are changing, and the way of life society is living. It's changing due to various factors, immigration or some other factors, and there are big changes, and that's the challenge. But I think for the existence of let's say bigger union or European Union, it's beneficial because it helps us ultimately to deal better with all sorts of challenges.
Well, if I understood you right, you see the European Union as a project that leads to a United States of Europe.
That will be the next part of the discussion, right?
All right, but in this respect, how far do you think geographically the European Union should go, and how many more countries then could join the European Union in the future?
No one can answer that question. I think that's the short answer. Yeah, there is no real answer, I mean, to that. I mean, because it's not driven only by economic interests, and that's the point. I mean, there is this element of cultural identity, European cultural identity, so there will be always argument used against expanding European Union too far away, the borders of the European Union. There will always be people will be picking up, politicians will be picking up, societies will be picking up that argument. Oh, but that's not European country, so we do not enlarge in that direction. So that there will be always this argument, so one cannot really say how far the enlargement can go, even if the potential candidate countries express their will. Oh, we want to join. The big question is, what happens if, it's a very theoretical question, Russia or there, I heard one good argument, one good example, theoretical example. One said that, yes, if we would be dominated only by our economic interests or immediate economic interests, then China would be admitted into European Union sooner than Croatia, for instance. That was just example. So it doesn't work that way. There are many aspects, included, or they have to be taken account. One has to take account of those, to keep in mind those aspects. But so there is no simple answer to that question, how far the enlargement of the European Union will go. How far, for instance, enlargement of NATO will go. I read the article in Spiegel, the letter actually saying that we have to invite Russia in NATO, or at least in longer perspective to keep a perspective. But then the question is, okay, and then where is the border? And that's the border is a Russian-Chinese border then for the alliance, and then maybe China too. Those are always very theoretical, so to say, questions, how far one can go. Difficult to say. Maybe in 500 years we will have one government on this earth. I don't know. Possible. Thank you.
You mentioned that there is a discrepancy between rhetorics and action. That we preach Europe, but in times of crisis, we see that we have to, or we think that we should act within national borders. What I observe is that we have a national rhetoric, though we understand perfectly that we are more and more European, and that we have to tackle those problems on a Europe-wide level. But we think that there is much to win for us domestically.
Oh yeah.
And that's why we somehow strengthen the national identity in an artificial way, because it out of political calculation. isn't that another indicator that we should strengthen the supranational level of Europe, because then it wouldn't be so easily used as a scapegoat?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I quite agree. I quite agree. Indeed, I mean, one should not underestimate the power of manipulation. I mean, done by politicians. I mean, they can change hats and play when it is convenient. They play the local role and say, oh, those evils in Brussels, they do this and that. And when it's convenient, they change it back and say, oh, no, we do because it's needed for Europe and greater good and so on and so on. Yeah, they're definitely. I mean, this is still, I mean, very much used. The thing is, I think that politics is very much becoming, or it has always been, I don't know, local. I mean, one can say that politics is local to a great extent. The politicians, well, it depends from political system, what kind of system you have in the country, but basically they respond or they answer to people who elect them, so to say, in national parliament or in European Parliament, and to an extent, or to a large extent, or larger extent, the politics is local also. So there will be this element. I don't know whether it will disappear someday. Maybe not. Difficult to say. It can only disappear in one way. If this kind of migratory movement is so large that it basically dissipates or it changes so much the community that it is not local anymore, or not local in the previous way. But this is also very, there are many risks in that process also. I mean, because it can always spark some, and that's why, I mean, the kind of nationalistic moves and so on, we say, yeah, well, there is too much immigration, we cannot cope with that. This changing our society ultimately, and it is not like it was before, we want it back, something like that. I mean, you can experience those arguments also in election campaigns in Europe, all over, basically. So there is this risk also exists. But I agree, I mean, we have to counterbalance, or to seek somehow to counterbalance that. The point is that the whatever economic development and political development we are having, it is confronted with the past. I mean, with previous experiences of individuals, communities, and basically because it brings changes in everyday life. And for some people, it will be always difficult to accommodate those changes, to get used to those changes, because they want to keep it as it was. They want to keep it as it was before, and they don't want changes. There's also a phenomena. I mean, there are many such things in individual humans. I mean, and doesn't necessarily all fits into kind of description of or regulation of the regulations of the European Union. Thank you.
Lab. I'm from Lithuania, and my question would be economically related. Well, a couple of years ago, we were like convinced the buying power both of our currency on Eastern European countries, or like Baltic countries, will be equal to the buying power of the rest of the Western European, like, and but unfortunately our currency, like comparing like Lat or Litas, and in contrary fell down strongly lately, you know. And so, in your opinion, will our currency like will go down further, or we will be in equal position, like, and if the rest of the countries, like in European Union, and if it will be equal, so your predictions, how long it could take that?
How long it will take? Yeah, well, no, it's a specific question, yeah, but it's a very important one. I think one has to look, first of all, not about the buying or purchasing. Well, purchasing power matters a lot, but to compare, but not separately looking. One must not separately look at currencies as such, because it. Numbers in this case doesn't matter that much. I mean, how many zeros you put behind one or two. What matters is how much you earn and how much you can buy for that money. You can print on paper whatever, how many zeros you want, doesn't matter. But what matters is the competitiveness of your economy, productivity of your economy, and from that, the result is basically GDP per capita, and that is comparable, basically, yeah, because that's indicator for living standard, very much so. The question is how we get the same or equal or pretty much close capacity or GDP per capita as it is in Western Europe, and how we elevate ours, so to say. Yeah, this is a big challenge for Eastern Europeans. Of course, this crisis is a major setback. I mean, it's said that we will reach, in Latvia, and nationally, we will reach back the level of 2008, somewhere around 2015. So we have been thrown backwards, so to say, quite a lot. Some people say, oh, yeah, forget it. For next 50 years, you will not get anywhere close to the level of living standard of the Western Europeans. I wouldn't be so skeptical, so to say, because 50 years, that's, in this case, again, not in the history of mankind, but in this case, it means a lot. I mean, in 50 years, a lot of things can happen. If we look back in 50 years in Europe, then it was totally different picture then, yeah. And what has been achieved in 50 years, it's quite impressive, yeah. Restoring countries from ruins of the Second World War and basically raising the living standard from nothing to very impressive level, yeah. So one shouldn't be too skeptic, but it's a major challenge, I think. It's and it's everyday challenge, basically, how our economy will look like. Whether there will be enough jobs, whether jobs will migrate, what will replace those jobs. If you have no enough jobs, that means that probably demographically your population is decreasing. If it happens, and that's partially true in Latvia, because of emigration, we are experiencing emigration in Lithuania too. To some extent in all Central Eastern Europe, this is a matter of fact. Then the rest who are staying there, they have to pay more for infrastructure to maintain it. Those are huge challenges, yeah, I mean, this is therefore we see also some conflicting elements. The people who say to hell with that. I mean, we don't need any global kind of economy, or it only destroys our everyday business and lives, and we go back to that. But it's impossible, of course, to go back to something. But we don't want any more changes. Yeah. But the problem is we have to adapt. That's reality. I mean, it's a big challenge. It's not only for us a big challenge. If you follow closely the processes in German economy, I mean, it's also a huge challenge for post-industrial country. And then the competition is all over the world. I mean, China included. And the question is how many jobs we can retain, or how many jobs can be retained in Germany, how many will migrate away to somewhere else. And that's a big issue. And each and every government has to cope with that issue, to be innovative and to think ahead, basically looking ahead around what's coming around the next corner. That's a continuous challenge for the government. Thank you.
I've got a very confusing question, maybe. We all agree upon the fact that the European identity is politically constructed. And it is actually constructed within the borders of the European Union. And we all know that the identity is actually constructed in an opposition, we towards the others.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, such countries, the members, the citizens of such countries as Albania or Ukraine don't actually feel European anymore.
They don't feel?
I wouldn't speak for all of the people,
Okay,
but
yeah.
in the sense we use the European identity, they may not feel European, because the term European identity is usually and often used within the borders of the European Union. And while constructing the European identity nowadays, the emphasis is put actually more on the differences than on the similarities we have. So my question would be, do we need the construction of this European identity right now when the Europe is not so much united as it might be in future?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. Do we need at all? I mean, this effort, or one can ask, is there effort at all? I mean, I would be tempted to say that it exists anyway. So without putting an effort in it, it's determined by culture, history, and economy as a minimum, but also political structures, yeah. But it exists anyway. If you take away if you take away political structures, then kind of cultural element, historical element, it's still there. I mean, is anyone constructing the European identity against someone? Depends. I wouldn't be convinced that in a hostile way. No, I wouldn't say so. In competing way, I think, yeah, kind of in positive sense, competing way. Showing a better example, for instance. I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, if it's kind of competing on the world scale element, showing that, look, we have achieved this and that, and it's a good way to do things, basically, or it's the best way to do things, even if we are sometimes tempted to say so. But I don't think it's in it's not constructed in a confrontational way or in hostile way, and that matters a lot. That makes a difference. Countries feeling excluded, yeah. That's, I mean, I think the first of all, it's a challenge for those countries to define. I mean, to define where they are, how they are going, what's their identity, where they belong, or its entity in itself. Like I don't know, we look Chinese or Russia sometimes. They say we don't need anyone else, so we are by ourselves. We are fine. Just we don't need anyone else. We are a nation state, and so on and so on. That's also an option. I mean, at least for a time being. But that's, first of all, I think the first step or first thing is the countries or societies themselves, they have to determine, to come to a conclusion, whatever compromise or whatever, in a very theoretical debate, so to say, what it is there, what kind of identity they have, and what they are going to do about it or with it, so to say, how they use it, and where they see their place in Europe. Or I don't think that Albanians in majority would say that they don't belong to Europe. I know that this might be a little bit more complex issue in Ukraine. At least east versus west Ukraine, and that's determined by history. I mean, one can say that in Latvia, yeah, we get lucky because we have mostly we don't have such a debate, because Latvian eastern border lies where the German crusaders stopped their advance. So the 700 years, 800 years, 700 years earlier. So there is no dispute, basically. That's the line. So for us, at least, it's not disputed. What one can create many theories. What would be if, I mean, the history would have been different? I don't know. I have no answer for that. I can base my judgment only on the reality what we have. So it's difficult also to give some prescription, so to say, for other countries. How should other countries, other societies, how they should feel, or how they should organize their own life? That's almost impossible, I would say. I'm not in that position to give such a prescription. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ambassador. I would like to offer that we take now a small break until 5:30, and then further questions can be answered during the panel discussion.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.